Hi, I'm Anne-Marie Zanzal, coach, ordained minister, grandma, mama of four, and a queer woman married to my lovely, gorgeous wife after I came out later in life. This is Coming Out and Beyond LGBTQIA plus stories, a podcast for everyone exploring identity, queerness, and what it means to live more truthfully, no matter our age or stage. We share stories of coming out, starting over, resiliency, how to navigate relationships, grief, joy, and building lives that actually fit us as human beings. No labels required, just curiosity, courage, and a little faith in this journey. Welcome. Let's dive in.
Right.
I'm curious, how old are the children that read your books generally?
I think for Hugo, Wonderstruck, and the Marvels, it's generally 8 and up. And
are
then
they independent readers at that point? Are they reading it by themselves or are they reading it with their parents?
I think it's a very good mix. I hear a lot of stories about teachers who share those books with entire classrooms where they read the book and then show the kids the pictures because they're all told partly with words and partially with pictures. Mm-hmm. And I hear from a lot of people who read the book, have read the book on their own. I hear from a lot of parents who read it to their kids. So I think it's a very, very wide range. And I also know it's read by young adults and adults as well. I've had a lot of people tell me that they read Hugo for the first time in college in a film history class. And the professor uses that as a way to introduce the history of cinema.
What's really interesting to me is that it feels like talking about the last 3 books is that it's almost development of queer identity slowly. And now this book, which is a young adult fiction. I want to tell you something really interesting. A lot of my later in life lesbians read young adult fiction.
Yeah.
You know why? Because we have something in the later in life community called our second adolescence. And it's like, you're like horny and you're like really like very interested in queer culture, very like, It's like everything is new. You're really, really excited about it. And I argue it's not a second adolescence. It's actually our first, because the first time around, it didn't really make sense. And most of us just sort of did everything we were supposed to do, because I think at that point, that's where their sensibilities are. Uh-huh. Now you've moved, this is your first young adult. Uh-huh. How would you define the difference between a young adult novel and a children's book?
I mean, the two things I have always been aware during my career that I didn't want to write about or wasn't interested in writing about or wouldn't be part of my stories was sex and cursing. Other than that, because my books are generally about things that interest me now, like the history of museums, deaf culture, the history of cinema, French silent films, none of which are generally thought of as interesting to children. So the adult topics I put right in, like those go right in. But I'm also, up until now, I've been writing about kids who are usually 12 and under. Mm-hmm. And again, like if you look at it like one piece of work, 1991, my first book, The Houdini Box, was published and the kid was 10. And then in, I think it was 18 years later, I wrote The Invention of Hugo Cabret, where the kid's about 12. And then I think The Marvels, which was about 7 years later, he's like 13-ish. Mm-hmm. And now in Runaway With Me, they're 16. But the other thing I'll say is I never wanted to write about teenagers before. The stories that came to me were about people who were 10, 11, 12. It wasn't that I sat down one day and said, I'm going to write a book for children. I had ideas for stories about people who were 10, 11, 12, 13. And therefore, it made sense that most of my audience would be people around that age, and that my publisher would be a publisher who publishes books for people around that age.
Scholastic, right?
Scholastic, yeah, has done. I've worked with other publishers, but Scholastic is my main publisher, and they're the publisher of the books we're talking about right now, as well as Runaway With Me. And so it was none of this was planned. We're talking about what happened. And during the pandemic, I had been working on this book that was going to be about a 12-year-old girl that wasn't going to be inspired by the book Rebecca by Daphne du Maurier, which I really love. And that book just never came together. And during the pandemic, when I had stopped working and was trying to figure out what to do and everything. I just felt like I, along with so many other people, were reassessing what we were doing, even though technically
the pandemic was a huge reassessment time for a lot of
right.
people.
And even for people like me who actually work at home, like I did not have an actual reason to change my work during that time because I could have kept working just like I was working since I work at home anyway. But I was very aware that that made no sense to me. Like because everything was changing, I was changing, my work had to change. And what I ended up making during this time was what became a book called Kaleidoscope, which is a very weird, abstract collection of 24 short stories, unlike anything I've ever written before, where each of the short stories are narrated by a first person, unnamed, ungendered narrator who falls in love with someone named James, who in most of the stories dies, and then they have to deal with their grief. So it became all about grief and the grief that we were all feeling during the pandemic, the grief I was feeling specifically, the grief that we were sharing universally. And sometimes they were children, James and the narrator, sometimes they were adults and it was a love story. Sometimes one of them wasn't human. Sometimes one of them was a doll or a bat or an angel. And it takes place over the course of a single day, but it also takes place over 3,000 years. And I think making that book really helped me shift a lot of the ways I was thinking about what stories are supposed to do and how I work. And I did another book after that called Big Tree that has a traditional beginning, middle, and an end, unlike Kaleidoscope, which is generally what I still remain interested in. But Kaleidoscope opened up a kind of access to the unconscious and a kind of poetic space that I think has always been in me, and it's part of what I do. But it came to the front for the first time. And that really shifted a lot of what I think about. And that book was not, I didn't really consider that a young adult book. There's love stories, but there's no sex. There's attraction and love, but it still felt to me like a book that could be read by any age person. Mm-hmm. But then when I was in Rome during the pandemic and I was, meeting these people like I was talking about who know Rome, and I was hearing these amazing stories and the city was empty, I just started imagining these two boys falling in love there. And again, that's something that happens in my stories pretty normally, which is I begin with a city or a place, a specific place that I want to set a story. And then I don't know who the characters are, but I can see them like a silhouette, and I know what gender they are, and I know what age they are. And right, so like from the beginning of working on the invention of Hugo Cabret, I knew it was going to be about a 12-year-old boy, but I had no idea who he is or what he was or what he was going to do until I worked out everything. So from the beginning of my time in Rome, I had seen these two boys. They were 16. I did not know who they were. I did not know if they were Italian or American or one of each, but I knew that these two boys were going to fall in love in this city. And it wasn't, until I was back in America for about a year and a half that I really started writing the book and getting all my actual ideas down that had been floating around back here.
Does that take up a lot of room in your brain?
I think, yeah,
right? You have no cards everywhere.
I know it is. I always love asking people how they imagine what their brain is like. Like, what is it like inside your head? Is it a library? Is it a junk drawer? Is it, like, what is it? And I don't have a clear answer for myself, but it feels like it's all there. It's not weight. Like I don't associate it with a weight. Like it's not weighing me down, but there is a kind of vision of space, and it is almost like when I consciously bring something to the fore, it moves forward. Other things recess, but because everything's connected, when you're thinking about this story, like I was describing, all these unconscious things are happening. So I'm thinking literally about the plot of my story, but underneath the surface, grief and sadness and lust and sex and desire and all these things that are part of our everyday lives, and money and worry and housing and everything is my partner, my family, what I'm angry about, what I'm worried about. It's not like it goes away, but something else can come to the fore for a little while. Time that I was starting to think about writing this story about these two boys, I was aware that I was going to need to write about sex in a way that I have never done before. And, in the Marvels, we get a love story between two men, but it's told by a grown-up to a 12-year-old boy. So you get the version that's appropriate for that storytelling. And it's about love, and it's about connection, and it's about, family. It's not about the desire that he feels the second he lays eyes on the other person and the night they were first together and like what that happened. Like, it's not about that. That's not appropriate. You wouldn't share that with a child.
No.
So now I had to put myself into the love story of these two boys, which I did not have. When I was 16, as we were discussing,
you didn't have that. And I'm like curious, like, how did you make that accessible, especially for kids today that are like 16 and 17, that will probably be your readers?
Now is the time to sign up for Wing Women Weekend, October 15th to 18th in Provincetown, Massachusetts. This isn't just a conference, it's a lifeline for women and non-binary folks who are new to queer community. You'll be stepping into a place where the energy is electric. Here is where you'll be seen, celebrated, and safe in your new queer identity. And you can receive 10% off your registration when you use the coupon code PRIDE. That's PRIDE. Participants report that this experience is life-changing. For more information and to sign up, visit wingwomenweekend.com.
So I can honestly say I do not understand, well, I do not understand anybody, but I do not understand young people today. And I would never presume to try to say I understand them. If I am talking to a young person today, it's about my curiosity. You tell me what your life is like. And if you have questions for me, I'll answer them. If you want to know how I did X, Y, or Z, or what my experience was like, I can share that with you. But I would never presume to understand what the life of a young person right now, dealing with social media, having grown up with the pandemic, having all of these, what's happening politically in the world right now, watching everything be dismantled that we watched get put together. I don't know what that's like. And earlier I talked about the two things I would never write about in my stories, which was sex and cursing. But the third thing is cell phones. I generally have no interest in writing about cell phones. And what that does is it allows me to keep from having to worry that my book is that it's going to date immediately if it's like very much about the cell phone, because cell phone use changes so quickly.
So rapidly, right?
That changes rapidly. How we use them, why we use them, what we do on them. So I'm consciously writing books that are set in the past. And even Run Away With Me, I decided to set in 1986, which is the past. And for a lot of people, it's the distant past. So I was born in 1966. So the same time gap from a person who was born, who's a teenager today, 1986. For me, having been born in 1966 is like thinking about the 1950s. And that the math might be slightly off, but that's the idea.
Well, actually 20 years ago is somebody born in the early 2000s.
Right. So 1986 is the distant past for young people who are alive today.
Yes.
But the things that I think don't change are the general ideas that we're about what we're dealing with: acceptance, love, family, hope, desire, connection. Those things, whether you're writing about someone in ancient Greece, whether you're writing about someone in Egypt in the 13th century, writing about someone in Persia in the 1600s. Of course, culturally, there's going to be profound differences that make us think about the world depending on what culture we're inside of. And if we're writing about someone in a different culture, writing about someone from the past, we do have to take into account the world in which we're writing if we're not writing science fiction or fantasy. But as a general idea, I think there are a lot of parallels throughout time. And I think especially the closer we get to now, and especially if we're writing about the West, there are, again, I'm speaking about myself as a white, queer, Jewish person. I feel confident that there are parallels that I can draw when I'm creating a story that readers today will find a connection with, even though it's not about a teenager in 2025 or whatever, 26, whatever, whatever year it is. Yeah.
The story of falling in love is universal. Like,
yeah.
I mean, we all can relate to that. Now, in this book, he's with his mom, and there's no dad. Are they divorced, or the character's divorced or something? Or is there's no dad in the book at all? So I think that's, considering what we just talked about, I think that's really interesting.
Yeah, in Runaway with Me, the American boy is with his mom. She's an academic. She got pregnant by another grad student when she was in grad school.
Mm-hmm.
And, God knows it's hard enough to be a single mom, and it's hard enough to be a grad student. So, doing those two things together are particularly difficult. But I think it was clear from the beginning of their relationship that this other student and her were never actually interested in being a couple. And I think he eventually just disappears, and I think she lets him go. She doesn't want him in her life. So I think it's just for this boy, it's just a fact about his life. It's not.
So is
something.
there any in this character, like a lot of times people focus on like longing for a parent. Is this character have any longing for that parent in this book, or is it really more about the longing for this boy?
Yeah, there is zero conscious longing in this character
Mm-hmm.
for that parent.
Mm-hmm.
Or I think because also what I'm writing about, the book takes place over about 10 weeks over one summer. And the American boy meets this very mysterious Italian boy. And they know from the minute they meet that they're going to have to separate at the end of the summer. So the book is essentially a countdown. And the enemy in the book, the villain, is time. And so they're in a race against time. We're in a race against time with them to see what happens over the course of this summer. And then there are three other queer love stories, one in 1940s, one in 1900, and one in the 1600s, that look at the ways in which queer people have found each other during times in which they are either actively prosecuted or are just not known about. That even in cultures that don't want us or know about us, we have found ways to find each other and to be happy. I wanted to write a book about what it means to be happy. But I also didn't want to ignore the pain and the difficulty of the world and what life is like.
But I think, having the three other stories in there is really important, because I think that younger queers sometimes don't realize the struggle that has been. Yeah. They just don't. And even, my wife came out in like 1981. So she was around when she came out in college. And, she tells me stories. I remember when I first moved down there, there's a couple that lives down the street from us. Are they gay? I don't know if they're gay. Are they gay? Two women that live together. And we were like going back and forth. They asked us over to dinner. And I said to them, "Oh, are you two a couple?" And my wife was like, and I'm like, "What's wrong with you?" But because when she was of age, when she was in her 20s and it was illegal to be gay, you never would ask somebody. Like, you would go out to dinner with another couple, you would think they were gay, and then finally, like maybe 3 hours into the night, somebody would finally say, "Are you guys gay?"
Yeah.
And that's how they would determine that. And so I think it's really important to have those other stories. I was a history major in college, so I love history. Yeah. And so I'm like so excited to go read this book, Brian. Get it right now, because it sounds like fascinating.
Yeah, it's about that history. And because I was one of those people who didn't know about our history, I found that the more I learned about my own history as a queer person, the more stable I felt. I didn't feel as unmoored as I had growing up. I didn't feel like that little island anymore, floating around by myself. I was part of a history.
Did you find, is your husband a historian?
He is, yes.
Okay. So did he teach you this history, or did you guys explore it together? How did you learn queer? Like, how did you just go about learning queer history?
I think it was a matter of being in New York. I moved to New York after college. That's where I first really started dating men. And I began to read books about queer history, which in high school and college, I was so scared of being near a book about queer history or a magazine about queer activities or anything that I avoided all of it. And it wasn't until New York that I went to, there were queer bookstores in New York, there were magazines that were available, and I began to learn that people like Walt Whitman, who having grown up in New Jersey, where there's the Walt Whitman rest stop, which turns out on the highway, which turns out to be queer for many reasons, is named for somebody queer. That I didn't know Walt Whitman was queer.
Yeah. So, but the truth is that they do erase us.
Yes, that is.
And like, I mean, we can talk about historical figures. I mean, Abraham Lincoln, all those things like that. It's like, it's almost like, unless they can catch people in some sort of sexual act,
Right.
they're not queer, because it's shameful. It's like, so like, there's an old saying, if it walks like a duck, quacks like a duck, it's a duck.
Yeah.
And a lot of times we just ignore that. They like erase our history constantly. And
Yeah, there's a lot of walking and quacking.
Passionate about history, that really bothers me. And it's something, until I came out, I didn't really pay too much attention to. Like, I knew, but since I've come out, like, I've realized so many more people that are queer than I ever thought there were.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think because you can connect the idea that it's not queer it's not shameful to have been queer. It's okay to speculate. Like I think a lot of we can't speculate was especially based around this idea. Well, it's, there's shame attached to it. And if you actually go into it, letting go of the shame, then of course, like, why wouldn't that be a conversation? Like, maybe they did, maybe they didn't. Perhaps we will literally never know. But the kinds of signs and the kinds of indications that you were talking about earlier, that we as queer people can read, the coding is there again and again and again. And the fact is, it offers us the fact that we know we've always been around, that we have always existed. And language, I do believe language shapes the way we think. So it is hard to imagine a world where people are attracted to someone of their same gender, yet there is literally no word for it. And there is no way of finding out about yourself or your history until you happen to meet someone and it's usually someone who you have sex with, right? Who you somehow in this, in Victorian England and whatever it was in the 18th century Italy, like whatever it is, there, you find ways to discover people like yourself. And then you begin to see that perhaps you see the larger culture in your area. Maybe you learn that in your city, if you happen to be in a city, that door over there goes up to a bar or a tavern or a place that will have other people like you.
Maybe I'm Not Straight is a do-it-your-own pace course that examines why it can be so hard to come out. In this course, we talk about divorce, deconstructing religious beliefs, internalized homophobia, and more. And for those of you who have unexpectedly found yourselves falling in love with a woman, and if that first lesbian relationship is now over, our course, When the Catalyst Relationship Ends, explores why first lesbian relationships are so impactful and why breakups in these relationships are so life-changing. You'll find our courses Maybe I'm Not Straight and When the Catalyst Relationship Ends in Authentically Us. Find Authentically Us at AnneMarieZanzal.com.
Does that happen to your characters in Rome?
No, but that is something that is interesting to me. And what does happen in my stories again and again and again is the characters making secret spaces for themselves and making places in which they can become safe. So it happens in my books for younger children. In Hugo, Wonderstruck. Hugo and Wonderstruck both have very explicit secret rooms where for Hugo, it's about survival. It's about living in a secret room that no one else knows about. He eventually brings his friend Isabel, or she breaks her way in to find out about it. The two boys in Wonderstruck make a secret room together that one of the boys had already known about. And then in Run Away With Me, the two boys also make themselves a secret room. But again, for them, it has a sexual component because they're older than the other characters. They're 16 and they're beginning to explore their sexuality. But the idea of the secret space and the door behind which there is something in my books, at least so far, are spaces that the characters make themselves. Although I hadn't thought about that connection with a place like those secret, safe places.
Do you have a secret space? Do you have a place that you go to that is like, or you and your husband go to that? You don't have to share with me where it is or anything like that, but do you cultivate stuff like that for yourselves?
I mean, I think if we're lucky, our houses become that for ourselves. Like if we're able to be with someone we love and we're able to be in a place that we love, in a home that we love, in a city that we love, the need for that kind of secret space shifts. And I think the desire to still go out to a gay bar, to still go to a club, to still go to a place that is exclusively queer, for some people may take on a different role, or may shift, or may become part of the life of the couple, or whoever's in the relationship. And I think there's ways of looking at all of that as being connected. And of course, those clubs generally are not secret, but they are places where we gather, where people who are like us gather.
I've often compared them to sanctuary.
Yeah.
In the sense that, so as a minister, after Pulse happened, I did a sermon about, and this was before I came out. It was the summer that I came out. And I talked about how, like, churches, wouldn't it be wonderful if churches were places of sanctuary for the queer community? But they're not. And I talk about how, like, bars, gay bars are sanctuary. Those are places that we congregate because it's just nice to be with your own people. And it's funny too, gay men tend to go out more than lesbians. That's why lesbian bars die.
There's a few still holding on, but yeah.
We get married, we watch TV. But my home has become a sanctuary.
Right.
Where before, because I was somebody who was always looking for the next thing and never really, until I came out, never really tied it to my queerness.
Well, I think that's incredibly beautiful. And I think the idea that the real sanctuary is the other person, and the secret space becomes a representation of what is happening between the people. And so the secret spaces that I create in my stories become this kind of sanctuary for what's happening between the characters. And in Run Away With Me, when they find this abandoned storage room in the basement of the museum where the American boy is living with his mom while she's doing her academic work, and they fix it up and they clean it out, and they find, some soft cushions, and they make a little fort, under which they can be together on the cushions. And again, there's an understanding that it's for them to explore each other in a sexual way. I leave the room before they have done very much with each other. I'm in the room with them. We're in the room with them as they're creating it, as they're settling down into it. But then what they do in the room is theirs. And it's up to the reader to decide exactly what may or may not be happening. But so much of the story is about the sensual awakening of, well, I would say the book is a first-person story told from the point of view of the American boy as an adult looking back on his 16th summer.
Yeah.
And I thought I was making up two fictional characters. And when I finished the book, I realized, as I often do, I was just writing about myself. But the Italian boy, I did consciously give to him two personal physical attributes of my own. I gave him asthma, which I have had since I was a child. It was very serious as a kid, and it's very manageable now. And when I was 10 years old, I had a very big surgery on my chest for a malformed sternum. So it has impacted me. The surgery, I'm fine. But the surgery has impacted me every day of my life. And I have this big scar. My chest is an unusual shape. It's affected me in different ways. And for various reasons, I decided to give those two things to this Italian boy. And to the American boy, I gave physical confidence. He is not ashamed or embarrassed by his body, which for me was like writing science fiction, like trying to figure out how to imagine what that would be like. And it wasn't until I finished the book that I realized what I had kind of written was me now telling me then. So if Danny, the American boy with confidence, represents me now, and Angelo, the Italian boy who's ashamed of his body and is afraid to be touched because of this scar, represents me then the actual plot of the book is about me now telling me then it's going to be okay. And it's okay. It's okay to be touched. It's okay to open yourself up emotionally, and as we were saying, I was very much in the closet when I was 16. I had no experience like this. There were boys who I felt this towards, but no one who I would ever have been able to describe it to.
Most of my friends, gay men, talk about the romances that they had. They really weren't romances. They were more very physical, and oftentimes they would never talk about it.
Right.
When they were over. Now they look back at them and say, oh, I was in love with him, but they just never had the words to be able to discuss it. And also didn't have the language to talk to the other boy about what was going on. So, right. I could talk to you for hours. First of all, I'm really excited for your novel. I'm really excited to read it. I can't wait. I'm gonna order it as soon as I get off the computer with you.
Thank you. I hope you like it.
Did you have a coming out song?
So I don't know if this, I think this sort of counts as an answer to that question, but because it was so difficult for me as a young person to find queer images, right? I couldn't just Google things.
You couldn't
And
Google things then.
so, the desire to see a shirtless person my age, a shirtless boy my age, was very strong. And I didn't know it was very hard to find anything.
Mhm.
But on MTV, the video for the song Total Eclipse of the Heart
I remember that song.
took place in some kind of like weird ghost boys boarding school.
Yeah, that's
where,
by Kim Carnes, right?
Yeah. Is that right? Yeah, I think that, yeah. And
she's like, that's a gay anthem.
Yeah. And she's like running through this boys' school, and like all their shirts are coming off and blowing in the wind, and they're dancing and running at each other, and it was just heaven. So every time that song would come on MTV, it felt like there was this kind of, I mean, I also really like the song. I think the song is totally amazing.
Yeah.
I still do, but there was something about that song that felt like a queer call to arms that gave me, I guess at the time it was giving me a thrill, like it was giving me a sexual satisfaction, but it was doing something else, right? That maybe I wasn't aware of, that it was getting me ready for the future. So I would say that comes to mind.
So asking an author this, but a book or a movie that really just blew your mind and changed your view of things.
Yeah, I actually already talked about the book that I'm going to speak a little bit more on, which was Weetseebad by Francesca Lia Block. I said earlier, it's a book that it's set in Los Angeles. It feels a little bit like a fairy tale in terms of the way the language is used. There's a gay couple that are very central to the story, Dirk and Duck. And I think because it was the first time I really saw young queer people like myself represented in a book, even though they were like exciting and beautiful and living a kind of life that I did not relate to directly. And I was living in New York, which felt very different from the Los Angeles that was being described in the book. There was something about the way everybody just accepted who they were, yet they were having real struggles, and they were very much afraid of this dangerous thing that was being spread through the blood, and through love. Like the way they describe it is AIDS is spread through love. And because I don't think it ever specifically says you get it from sex. The way Francesca Lia Block talked about sex was by identifying sex with love. And I thought that was incredibly profound. And I just remember feeling like everything had shifted when I finished that book. And the movie that I saw that did the same thing for my brain, which happened around the same time I read Weetseebad, was Poison by Todd Haynes, and the beginning of the new queer cinema. And I think looking back, there's so much about Poison that has influenced everything I've done. It's 3 different narratives that weave back and forth in different genres, different styles. One of them is black and white. One of them, 2 of them are in color. One of them takes place in a boys' boarding school. But it's about queerness, it's about AIDS, but as cinematic metaphors. And it gets at the political, the personal, the sexual in these ways that are both direct and literal, but also oblique and mysterious. It's about how being a young queer person alive at the height of the AIDS crisis felt. And there's anger in it, and there's beauty in it, and it really just shook me profoundly.
In a frightened sense, or
that's such a good question. It was not frightening because it was true. And what's true, that's interesting. Truth is frightening. Like the reality is frightening. Right? Like we can all acknowledge that.
You were talking about words, and you were talking about words before, and I was thinking about the Trump administration, like banning words that can't be used in words that we use all the time.
Right. Like you can't ban trans people out of existence by saying the word doesn't exist.
Yeah.
They can do it legally. They can do a lot of things legally. They just can't do it in reality. But they can make our lives profoundly worse. And that is a reality. That is reality. But will trans people stop existing? No.
No, because they've always existed.
That's not a reality. Believing that by removing a word, you can remove a person.
But back to poison. Like for you, it was life-giving.
For me, it was, okay, being able to know that you can face the horror of what's going on. The AIDS crisis and the government response to the AIDS crisis was a horror that you can find parallels with in terms of what's going on today. It's worse today, which is unbelievable, having lived through that. But there are real parallels about how horrible it was to hear what the government was saying and doing about us, how much hatred there was towards us, how much death was happening because of their inaction. And I found it very empowering to look that ugliness straight in the face and say, see that, I understand it, and I'm going to fight it. And I'm going to still make something beautiful. And for all of the pain and all
that, you really have, like, you've accomplished that because your books are beautiful. And you looked at something that was ugly and in the face and said, okay, well, I'm going to create art that counters that. I
also want to say I'm a huge advocate for reality TV and things that do like deny reality, because sometimes you also need to just have your comfort food, right? Right?
Oh my God. I would like, what do we, there's some show, like we watch like RuPaul. I watch RuPaul. It's like junk candy, you watch it, you have fun, but not everything has to be serious and that,
Yeah. But I think ultimately for myself, that was a profound shift in my thinking and a profound lesson and something that I haven't forgotten.
Yeah. It sounds like you lost the fear of being gay seeing that.
Yeah, I hadn't thought about it like that. But that's
Gosh, Brian, you've given me so much to watch.
Yeah.
So how would you describe your life today?
My life today is really good. Like I'm very, and I don't say that flippantly. Like I was aware you were going to ask me that question. Mm-hmm. And it was the first thing that came to my mind. And a lot of times when I think of something that quickly, I think, well, that's too easy, or you have to think of something more complicated.
That's the truth usually when it comes up like that.
Right. So I was like, my life is good. Like I have a husband who I love very much, and we still really like each other. We always say it's harder to like someone for a really long time than it is to love someone for a really long time.
Yeah, that's true. It is.
And we still really like each other.
Like to have fun together.
Yeah. I get to make work that I want to make. I live in places. I live in New York and San Diego. He teaches at UC San Diego. I love my friends. I love my family. And I say that with the understanding that I'm sure everybody has, which is it's hard. Like there's so many hard things going on, right? Mm-hmm. And like with every single thing I just mentioned, there are real challenges and real difficulties and real questions that I cannot answer about how I'm going to get through a certain thing or how I'm going to figure something out. And real profound pain attached to a lot of, if not most of, what I just listed. But
I think that's I think that's typical of most of our experiences.
Yeah.
If you asked me that question, I would describe my life as I'm very happy with my life. It was a lot of the things I've done are incredibly hard, but I'm really happy with my life, and I'm really happy with the work I do.
Yeah.
I love working with people coming out.
Yeah.
It's really profound, and they've taught me so much, and so many brave people out there that just know that they have to do something to change their lives. And so that has been really, as I've gone away from, it is my ministry, even though technically, I was ordained as a minister at UCC, which is pretty progressive here in the United States. But that work now feels like that's what I'm here for. I'm here to do that work. And it feels like that talking to you, and this is going to end up being a 2-episode podcast. Usually we're 35, 40 minutes. We're now at an hour and a half, and I will cut us very nicely. Do 2 episodes. But it seems like that for you, this career of writing and sharing stories is really what you're meant to do. This is why you're here.
Yeah, I feel that very strongly, even when I'm having a day like I am today, where I'm in the middle of a news story and I can't figure out how it's going to come together and what the plot's going to be and exactly, and there's difficulty.
It must be fun.
But
it must be just fun to just sit there. And if that was me, God, my poor family would lose me because I don't, but like, I think, I mean, is it fun? I mean, I would think it would be fun to just be able to like, just make up these lives and figure out how everything works together.
Yeah. I think okay, I have to admit, fun is not the word that is coming to my mind. It's great. Like it's really, really great. It's really satisfying. It's really challenging. It's really hard. I love it. I love it. But somehow fun isn't the word, isn't quite the word. But I love it very profoundly, and I'm very proud that this is what I get to do with my time. And I really, really love being able to do it throughout whatever part of the process I'm in. And actually, as I'm talking, I can feel the word fun rising up a little bit.
Okay. Good.
So maybe it actually is.
Okay. It's okay to have fun.
Maybe that's what I needed to hear.
Yeah,
Maybe
it's
that's
okay to have fun. And with your work, I guess, sometimes I don't know, it depends on who our parents are, but oftentimes like our work ethic, we're like not supposed to have fun and be at work at the same time. But
yeah.
I don't know. I think it's okay to have fun with
I mean, so much of the process is fun, right? Like I get to travel, I get to go to see different cities. I get to ask people who are experts in things I'm not experts in to tell me about what they love. Like that is properly fun. So yeah, I think in our next session, we'll have to explore my difficulty with the use of the word fun.
Okay. Ryan Selznick, thank you so much. You can find that wherever you purchase your books. And I'm really excited to talk to you today. It was a wonderful conversation. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you. I really love talking to you.
You've been listening to Coming Out and Beyond, LGBTQIA plus stories with Anne-Marie Zanzal. New episodes of the Coming Out and Beyond podcast drop every other Friday. You can tune in at Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Google Podcasts, and at annemariezanzal.com. Be sure to hit subscribe when tuning in so you never miss an episode. And for more resources, articles, videos, and a free downloadable guide for coming out later in life, visit annemariezanzal.com.